Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Carrick, as Eric said. And before we begin, I just want to take a moment, since this is the last day of the conference, to thank Mike Martin and Eric D'Souza and Alex and Gavin, the tech guy, and the entire team for the Maple Leaf Mystery Conference. It's been terrific. If you've been at any of the panels, it's been informative, insightful, and just plain fun. So here we all are. Again, I'm Donna Carrick, and I want to introduce you to our panelists today. First up, I'm going to introduce you to Amy Tector, who is the author and archivist from Quebec's Eastern Townships. Amy's debut novel, The Honeybee Emeralds, is set in Paris and traces the history of a mysterious necklace. Her murder mystery series, The Dominion Archives Mysteries, launches this autumn. The first in the series, The Foulest Things, and you can see the cover for The Foulest Things behind me, was a 2008 Unhanged Arthur finalist. She now lives in Ottawa with her husband, her daughter, and a dog named Daffodil. I love that dog name. For anyone who is not familiar with the Unhanged Arthur, it's not actually called that anymore now, but what it is it's a contest put on by the Crime Writers of Canada for Best Unpublished Novel. So that's quite a prestigious award to have taken, Amy. Joan Donaldson-Yarmy, I'm not sure if she's in the room with us right now, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. She began her writing career with a short story, progressed to travel and historical articles, and then on to travel books. She made a switch in 2008 and now writes fiction in various genres: mystery, young adult, historical, sci-fi, and time travel. She's had 3 novels published in her Traveling Detective Mystery series. The first novel in her Dating Coach mystery series, A Killer Match, and you can see the cover behind me, was released in April of this year. After 17 years of living in Vancouver Island, Joan has now moved back to Edmonton. Linda Cahill is here, and she loved covering crime for major newspapers. So it is no surprise that she writes police novels for fun and branched out to spy fiction after her family was posted to the Middle East. Linda's short stories have appeared in various venues, including the anthology Villainous Vacations and the 2020 release, A Grave Diagnosis from Carrick Publishing. Hope Thompson is a graduate of UBC's Creative Writing MFA. Hope's work explores the queer experience through history and genre, specifically comedy, crime, and mystery. Hope has had plays produced in Toronto, Vancouver, and Los Angeles, and her award-winning short films have been screened and broadcast internationally. On the television side, Hope wrote 2 seasons of CBC's Baroness von Sketch Show and recently co-wrote the first season of a dramedy for Out TV, and I love that word, dramedy, Hope. Her crime fiction stories have been published in serialized form, and her latest, Stage Diary 1953, appears in the Crime Writers of Canada 2022 anthology, Cold Canadian Crime, which is hot off the presses. So welcome to all our panelists. It's really great to have you all here, and I'm looking forward to talking with you and hearing about your works. My first question that I've got is for Amy Tector. Your protagonist in The Foulest Things, Jess Kendall, is a trainee historical archivist. She faces a number of on-the-job challenges, not the least of which is the fact that her only romantic interest in the story hides a whiskey bottle in his desk. So can you tell me how important or unimportant is the romantic tension, the sort of push me, pull me aspect of the story, the tension in your stories?
Thank you so much, Donna. Yeah, I think it is important. Of course, I wouldn't have included it if I didn't, I didn't think it was important. That being said, I do think the mystery is the key. You know, I wrote a murder mystery. The Foulest Things is a puzzle and there's some murders that need to be resolved, and that's the focus of the book. But the romantic elements, I think, add a lot more human elements, so that it allows you as the author to kind of explore different sides of your characters and show different sides. They're not just sort of ruthlessly trying to solve a crime, but they're also taking some pauses to experience all that life has to offer. So I don't think that a murder mystery has to have, you know, romantic elements to it. A mystery has to have those romantic elements, but I think it can, you know, flesh your characters out more, give you a little bit more room to play, maybe also space to have something lighter in the mystery where it can sometimes get quite dark.
Mm-hmm. Or darker. Sometimes the romance is dark.
That's right. You're right. I'm viewing love with very rosy eyes. It's true. It could
Sometimes
be quite
romance really is black humor, you know.
That's a good point.
How about you? How do you feel that romance fits in, and the tension of romance fits into your crime stories?
Yeah, I think it's another element that is interesting to add in to help show, to give the protagonist the flaw, like to help reveal their vulnerabilities. And it's interesting, like in the most recent story, the protagonist is married and is in a sort of an abusive relationship, and is about to make an attempt to get out of that relationship. And but because they've been together for, you know, over 20 years, the marriage still has like significance. And so it's sort of this elasticity. It's they, you know, they can draw themselves apart, come close together, but severing it is really difficult. And so I think it's an interesting feature to have, to help show more about the protagonist and their vulnerabilities.
And their humanity, really, because, you know, the first story is love. That's always the first story. And when you do bring that into, I mean, I never thought of it that way personally, because I was always on the darker side of crime. I always thought of myself as more of a gritty writer, you know, that sort of thing. And then I realized that my latest story, which is going to be in these Madames of Mayhem anthology in the fall, actually is a love story. I mean, it's about as dark a story as it can get, and the love element is extremely dark. That's why I made that comment, Amy. But it is actually a love story, so at its very heart. So, and I didn't even realize it when I was writing it. Now, Linda, I know that your story is not actually a love story, Escape from the Beach, but it is romantic in another sense, in that in the perception of the players, they are knights on both sides, and they are trying to save and to rescue and to do what they believe is the right thing. And in the traditional literary sense, that's a very romantic notion. Can you tell us how love of family and love of your country, that sort of thing, comes into this story, which is called Escape from the Beach, and it appeared in Villainous Vacations?
Yes. Well, yeah, that is not a romance for sure. It's a romance only in the sense that all the characters think they are the ones that wear the white hats. It's actually it's a story based on set in a war zone and based on how people respond during a war. But and I'll talk a bit more about that after. But I have to say that I'm writing a police procedural, and the whole concept of the romantic aspect of it is super important. And I didn't know that at first. I was like halfway through the ultimate draft, and people were saying, you know, your main character, he seems to like his Jeep more than his girlfriend.
I like that. And I liked your comment about not knowing that it was a romantic story, because we don't always know as authors where we're headed with different things. And I'm fascinated with this concept. I remember that Anne Rice, and you know, may she rest in peace, because she was definitely a huge influence on women writers everywhere, in every genre. But she once was interviewed and asked whether the young child vampire was representative of her daughter, who died of leukemia. And she was shocked with the question, and had, you know, she was so adamantly opposed to the notion that she could have been drawing. And yet later her husband was interviewed on the same question. And he was quite sure that that's where the character had come from. So, you know, it's funny, we don't always see it ourselves. So tell us about the love in your police procedural.
Well, I thought I'm not very romantic. I don't have a romantic bone in my body. So I thought the police procedural was the perfect genre because it's all about solving the crime. There's lots of people that interact, but they don't have to be romantic. And as I say, eventually I realized that, first of all, characters without romance are really kind of dead, right? People think that romance is not the important aspect of a story. And I think quite the reverse. As you said, Donna, it's the first story, the romance story. So a character without the romance is just a character that is very hard to get involved with. I mean, you know, you have the Dirty Dozen sort of story with all the 12 guys and they're interacting, but that's sort of the bromance, right? I mean, these guys all have these emotional responses to each other. So, so when I started working through the police procedural, I realized that, first of all, both the protagonist and the antagonist were involved at one point with the victim of the crime. So there's a personal aspect to it right there. And a story that has a gloss of romance, I mean, maybe not conventional romance, but a gloss of romance is something that the readers can identify with much more than a pure, simple police procedural or any other type of crime story, I think.
I absolutely agree, Linda. And in fact, some of the grittiest male writers through history who write the most gritty PI gumshoe type of things, there is always a love in their life, and she may be dead. That may have been a catalyst for the beginning of the series, having lost that love, or the love may be unrequited or whatever it is, but there's always that kernel of love somewhere in it. To my next question, I was going to direct it at Joan, but I'm going to direct it instead at Hope because it fits perfectly well with Hope's story, which is, I believe it's Stage Diary 1953, and it's appeared in Cold Canadian Crime, which just came out. So look for that, please. And your character in that, her job is really important, really elemental to the story. My question is, how important is the role or the job or the profession of the protagonist to your story?
Yeah, like you say, it's elemental in this specific story. And I think it is probably important in most stories because it's, you know, how the protagonist is designed by the author. But in this particular story, she's a housewife or homemaker set in the 50s, and she's in a relationship with her husband who's sort of abusive. And so her role, her profession is being prescribed to her by society. It's a very narrow role, and she yearns to be like sort of like a Hedda Gabler character. She yearns to be creative. She yearns to express herself beyond this narrow homemaker, housewife type role. And so it's essential to the story. Without that, there really would be no story. And so it's really about how she seizes the moment to do that.
Yes, I saw that. I could see that in the story. Amy, how about you? How essential or non-essential is the work life of your protagonist to the stories?
Well, like Hope, it's essential. The story is really a workplace story in some respects, and the workplace is the archives. So it's the fictional. I work at the National Archives of Canada, so I want to say it's a fictional National Archives of Canada, but definitely. The mystery revolves around hidden secrets in the archives. My protagonist, Jess, is a very newly minted archivist who's extremely keen and anxious about kind of making her mark and creating a career for herself. And so she takes her profession very seriously, which actually causes a few problems or gives her some challenges. She's very worried about sort of whether she'll be able to create a career for herself because she's on probation, and for a year while they sort of test her out. And she really wants this job. So so all of those sort of early career stresses she's feeling, and then she's working in and immersed in this place. I can't speak from personal experience. People who work in an archives are passionate about what an archives is and about history and about preserving history and making it accessible. And so her colleagues are all a little bit kooky and a little bit interesting, and are also immersed in and passionate about those same things. So it's very workplace centered, and the initial body is found in the archives. So it really it's all about her job.
I know exactly what you're saying there. I mean, some people might think that a passionate archivist is an oxymoron, but I have a very good friend who's just retired as a family physician, and she's volunteered to be an historical archivist I believe she's in Midland. She's just started, so I'm not exactly sure where she is, but I think she's in Midland in the, you know, there's a great area, St. Marie among the Hurons, that whole area. You know, there are great archives of data that need to be preserved, you know.
Yeah.
And
Really.
Linda, I think this is an obvious question for you with the police procedural, how important the job is to your character. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what your own history and knowledge of this brought to their job?
Well, I started writing this novel because there were police officers in my family, and the neighborhood I came from, as I discovered when I went to university, was known for either musicians or bank robbers. And also, I suppose, there's the odd police officer in the neighborhood. But I covered the crime beat somewhat in Montreal for the Gazette, and I spent a lot of time covering crimes and covering courts. And so I was fascinated by all these characters, by how they, you know, ran around solving murders or not solving murders or getting into fights in bars and all that. I'm afraid I knew a fair number of characters, not personally, but I did know quite a few of these sorts of characters. So when I decided to write a novel, it was just a natural fit for me to try and go for the police procedural. So that's why I did it.
Maybe had a little too much knowledge on that. Maybe more than you wanted to admit.
Sometimes, perhaps. And the thing is, with a crime story, and especially a police procedural, you bring everything into it. It's about the character of the place where you are. It's about the people interacting. It's an opportunity to explore people's motives in every respect, and to see how they interact. So I just found it fascinating, and I think it's just one of the best ways to write a book, and it's certainly one of the ones I like to read personally.
Yeah. Just a little off the cuff question for you, Linda. I think I heard you say that you worked for the Gazette. That was a Southern paper, right?
Yes, that's right.
So we have that in common. I worked for Southern I still do the same job I did when I started with Southern, but of course Southern no longer exists. We've been changed hands so many times. Southern wouldn't recognize us anymore, but yeah, it's amazing how many of our people in Crime Writers of Canada actually had Southern ties at one time.
I've noticed that too, and also journalism ties, and it's one of the things, I suppose, that pitched me toward the police procedural again, because I was sort of familiar with the genre and the ambiance.
Yeah. Now, my next question really is directed for Hope. I had wanted to ask about the different formats that can be the catapult for a story. For example, I'm fascinated with diary style stories or letters. I see, I recently published a book, it's not a nonfiction, for a family whose the only son in the family had died on the Gloucester outside of Crete in 1943. And it was letters home, the entire book, because in those days, everybody wrote letters. We didn't have internet, we didn't have email, we didn't even have easy access to telephones. Every day, this young man in his early 20s wrote a letter, and he was an officer on the Gloucester. And the last letter was posted the day before the boat went down. So it's extremely moving. And as a catalyst to tell his story, it's just fascinating. The letters to and from his family. Now, you explored the diary format. How did you come across that, and what made you decide to use that as a forum for your story?
Yeah, I wanted to really get into the main character's head. And as this woman trapped in this marriage, the diary form seemed like a good way to make the story really about her secret sort of diary, where she's so you're really inside her head. You feel like this is what she's written down, and it's also a stage diary, so it feels like sort of a hybrid of two things. Oh, there's also directorial notes, so it feels like she's acting it, because her creativity, the thing she yearns to do is be an amateur actor, to get onto the stage. So it feels like there's directorial notes here and there in the story, so that I was trying to get the feel of her personal account that she's writing to herself about what's happening to her, about the choices that she's making, but at the same time, she's on stage performing it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how successful that is, but trying for a destabilizing form, because she's going through a stage. She's going through a series of events. It could go poorly, they could go very well or poorly, but it's a transitional period.
Very successful. I mean, it was chosen to appear in Cold Canadian Crime. And so I do think it was very successful as a form. There's so many different styles. I mean, there's first person singular, there's first person present tense, there's third person omnipresent, there's past present, there's straight storyline where you go 2-2-2, and there's just so many ways of telling a story. Amy, what is your preferred? And I mean, I understand that the preferences change over the years, but right at the moment, what is your preferred storytelling forum?
Oh, I love this question. I love the question too of letters. Certainly, again, as an archivist, that idea of the past and those connections that you get from the past through physical letters, is always very intriguing to me. And in most of the books that I've written, I have included usually some sort of secret letters that somebody discovers at some point to move the storyline along. My debut novel is 4 point of view characters in close third person, so each of them telling parts of the story and moving it along, whereas The Foulest Things, which comes out in the fall, is first person, one character. So I've been sort of playing with, and then I've also written third person, close, I guess, with one character. I think what I like doing is having a couple of characters point of view, because then I like that sort of dichotomy of two people seeing the same thing or experiencing something, and having different reactions to it. And as a reader, I love reading those books where you're like, oh, this is how this thing is, and then you hear the other person's side and you're like, oh, wait a second. So I like that play back and forth for sure.
Exactly. A very close friend of mine complained recently about the use of unreliable narrators. I happen to actually kind of like them. Maybe I'm unreliable, but in a case like that, it's not really an unreliable narrator. Each one is reliably saying what they see. But as any good police person knows, and yes, I'm looking at you, Linda, as any good police person knows, every point of view can be quite different, even though the teller may be honest. And so that brings me to you, Linda. What kind of format or point of view or telling do you prefer right at the moment?
I'm really a third person narrator, and I guess it's because of the kind of story I'm trying to tell. I mean, it could be first person, but I don't think it would work very well that way. There are many areas where I think first person works terrifically, but for the story I'm writing right now, no. And in the same way, I mean, there are emails, people read emails maybe, or they send a text message, but it's really more about straight on people talking to each other, interaction. Detective stories are always about, interviewing suspects or potential suspects or witnesses. So almost everything isn't, well, not an interview, but it's all conversational, right? Whether you're trying to find, the mark of a tire or something, or where people were when they said they were at the bar, but they weren't really. It's all about conversation. And so it's kind of a straight up narrative, I think.
Yeah.
That's what I'm used to.
Actually, you raised a good point about the story really does determine. And when you have written enough and you start to gain confidence and gain your voice, you soon realize that the story will tell you how to tell it. And I mean, I've written one in first person, and I loved doing that because that particular novella, it was highly organic to tell it in first person. And it really was the only way it could have been told. And of course, there are all the things that the first person doesn't know. And those are revealed and they are shown, and her gaps are shown and they become very obvious. But that's the way it is in nature. We don't know everything. And I've written in the third person omnipresent, which, for some stories is just essential because you can't gather all the facts otherwise, So I think that's a very good point that you raised, that the story will tell you how to tell it.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, you've got to trust that. You've got to trust that. All of you have stories that range from very light to very dark. And some of you write in various shades, shall we say.
And genres.
And genres, exactly. And genres, shades and genres. Amy, I'm going to start with you this time. I know I said I was going to start with Linda, but I'm going to start with Amy, and I have a reason for that. How light or dark is your current work, and how light or dark is the romance involved in it, and why?
Yeah, I would say it's on the lighter side. The Foulest Things, despite its quite dark title. Yeah, I would say it's on the lighter side, and then that the romance is tonally there as well. There's a lot of, I hope I hope people find that there's a lot of humor in the story, and that it moves along quickly and sort of grapples with some big questions, but in a more lighthearted way. And why? I tend to write in that tone. I love darker stories and twisty stories and scary stories, but I tend to create in the lighter vein. I think
you have to write what's in you, and it's not always what you like to read. In the previous panel, or one of the two panels ago, I think it was Vicky who said that you've got to read everything, not just the stuff you like to write, because it all comes in and creates the mosaic of your own work, and I think she was quite right on that point. But then at the end of the day, we write what's in us. We write what is dying to come out. How about you, Hope? How light or dark would you say your work is on the scale, and why? And the romance, how light or dark?
I would say it's a bit on the lighter side. The romance in this particular story is quite dark, but I think overall I tend to more the cozy or the comedic, I think that's where I naturally sort of tend to go. But I like reading all types of crime and literature, and
or literature. Thank you for saying that. Or literature, because
I know that came out wrong
as literature. I think of all writing as literature. I just do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I know what you mean. I mean, we've got to, because we love our crime, we love our detectives, but we've got to reach beyond that too.
Yes, I meant like non-crime fiction. The other types of writing.
No, I know what you meant, and I agree with you. I'm not trying to give you a hard time. It just comes naturally to me. Sorry. And the reason I put Linda last, even though I'd intended to put her first, is because you've got something just a little bit different going on in yours, in your escape from the beach, and I wanted to talk to you about it. How light or dark would you say that story is?
Okay.
And why did you go with that particular shade for that story?
Well, I've always felt that it's important to, if you're going to write about something, it should be something that matters. And whether it's a personal story or an emotional response to something, I sort of feel like it's important to deal in a fictional way, maybe, with important questions. And this is a story about the Middle East, and I lived there. My husband was a correspondent there, and one day we got caught up in a terrorist attack, and I felt very strongly I've put the story into the position, into the point of view of a child, because many of the people who are involved in wars or whatever are children, and their voices are not usually heard. We're hearing them a bit nowadays, especially with the awful things that are happening in Ukraine. But normally you don't hear about them, and they're not collateral damage exactly, but they're collateral. What happens to them is decided by other people, by their parents, effectively. So I wanted to explore the concept that people go willingly to war zones, and sometimes children get caught up in it. And how would it look to you if you were caught up in a terrorist attack and you were a child? And it gave me the opportunity to deal with the terrorist attack, which was quite something, and the resulting, helicopter gunships overhead, and sort of basically the fighting, to deal with all of that, and at the same time see it from the point of view of a child. And also it sort of allowed me to work through kind of almost like a Smiley's People sort of thing. It's like spy versus spy, and who are the white hats and who are the black hats, and all that stuff. So I had a lot of fun with that, and I'm glad I did it. But when I gave it to my son-in-law, he said, I think this is about your daughter, and I don't think her kids should read it. At least not yet. They're too young.
Well, I think you figured out the reason I wanted to put you last on that question is because it segues so well into the personal experience question that I had planned to ask.
Okay.
And Linda, I want you to start with that one and tell us how your personal experience comes into your writing. Generally, it doesn't have to be about this story. It can be, but just generally, do your personal experiences tend to seep into your work?
I guess that's true for everyone. You can't imagine. It's not that you put. I mean, I know people say, well, I put characters into my books because they really need killing, but you don't really put people like that into your books. I mean, you may create a character that maybe has some aspects of somebody that you might have not liked, but it's not really like that. As you know, the characters are the characters, and they come out of their own. I think they come out of their own perspective, and so your background can inform. For instance, my interest in the police procedural was very much informed by my background, but other stories I've written and other stories that I have in mind to write, are not like that at all. So yes, there is an influence, certainly, for that story I wanted to write because of looking at children as collateral damage in a war zone, right? Because it's really a war story and a spy versus spy story, but it's seen through the eyes of an 11-year-old. So that was the way I wanted to do that. But I don't know if I guess you could say you are influenced, but I guess a lot of it does come in, and yet you're not writing your own story. I don't think. I mean, maybe
No.
some people are.
Although it harkens back to one of the very first things we talked about the Anne Rice situation with
Well, that's true.
The young vampire. Sometimes we're not even aware. How about you, Amy? How much or how little would you, if you had to analyze yourself, be your own analyst, how much or how little would you say of your own experience comes into your stories?
I think a lot. I think I have yet to write a book that doesn't draw on some experiences that I've actually had, whether my first one was set in Paris, living as an expat, which is something I'm familiar with, the archives, I'm familiar with that. So I feel comfortable. I think so far in my writing, I've needed to feel comfortable in the world that I'm writing in order to get going. But then, just as Linda says, as I'm writing, the characters become their own people. So certainly there are elements of myself. You know, my husband has read my books and said he sees elements of my very best friend. So she sort of can pop in. She's quite funny. So, so you know, the people in my life get into the stories, but not in ways that I'm conscious of. And I would say as well, the characters that get created are their own people. They exist, you know, outside of me, influenced by me, but doing their own thing. And I think conflating the author and the characters is a not dangerous thing. It's a common something that always happens. Yeah. But I think it is a mistake because I think it's an amalgamation and it's lots of things and it's imagination and it's a little bit of magic too. So
yes, exactly. Officially, before I turn the spotlight on Hope, officially, we always say all of the characters and situations are purely fictitious and are products of the author's imagination. Unofficially, we often can see little bits. Not, I mean, as you said, they're an amalgamation or, you know, a composite almost of different situations we've been in or different people we've met in passing or knew well. But that doesn't mean that they are these characters. The characters really do have a life of their own, in my view. How about you, Hope? How much of your own personal experience would you say comes into your creative writing?
Lots of it. Like there's so many, like in this particular story, there's this theatrical yearnings that this woman had. I have a bit of a background in theater, and but it's more than just like a background in theater type of thing. For example, I was reading a screenplay that I wrote about 10 years ago, and I had sort of shelved it, and I went back to look at it the other week, and I read it through and I found all sorts of problems with it. They were good to fix, like with fresh eyes, fantastic experience. But, and I thought, how could I have made those mistakes? But 10 years on, we're getting better, hopefully. And, but the other thing was I saw, as I was reading, I thought, oh, there's that thing that happened to me. There's that. Like I had put these little things in from certain times in my life, things that are only inside me, little like vulnerable moments or this or that, but little things that I plopped into these characters, and I could spot them, but you know, no one else will ever be able to. But I thought it was interesting to see where my head was at back then.
Yeah,
And,
that's well put, that they're little things that live inside us, even if we are or are not aware of them. And sometimes we're only aware of them in retrospect when we look back on those works, which is kind of fascinating too. I'm not sure how our time is going, but at this point, I am going to ask each of you, and we can come to other questions afterwards, but this is an important question and I don't want to overlook it. Where can readers find your work? And I'm going to start with Hope this time.
They can find I just have the Crime Writers of Canada anthology, and that's available wherever good mysteries are sold. And so yeah, bookstores, online.
Cold Canadian Crime. Please look for it. It is newly minted. It's available for you right now in any format you could possibly want it, except maybe Pony Express. So Cold Canadian Crime, and Hope Thompson is featured with her story, Stage Diary 1953. It's a wonderful story. Thank you, Hope. How about you, Amy? Where are your works available?
Yeah, my debut, which came out in March, The Honeybee Emeralds, is available everywhere where you can buy a book, and it's the same. It's hardcover, it's paperback, it's audio, it's ebook, all the rest. So any bookstore should have it. And then The Foulest Things is coming out in the fall. So please look for it in September.
Okay, I'm not going to put Linda too much on the spot because I know that her police procedural is now underway, but Linda has appeared in numerous anthologies over the years, not the least of which is Carrick Publishing's own A Grave Diagnosis. So you can look for that, and her story, The Referral, which is a brilliant little story. It's quite diabolical. No love in it.
No, none.
Love lost, unless it's love lost, you could call it love lost. But it's a very diabolical story. So, and where else, Linda, what other anthologies have you been in?
Well, the anthologies including like the Sisters in Crime anthology and the Grave Diagnosis and the Villainous Vacations and the Farious North. Sleuth has them all as far as I last time I checked.
And that's
And
Sleuth
so-
of Baker Street.
Sleuth of
Mm.
Bakers, yeah. In Leaside in Toronto. But yeah, the other ones and the other stories I have, they have links on my site, but my site is under reconstruction, so I'll have to fix that.
Thank you very much all for sharing. I just saw Alex pop in. Alex, were you joining us for, did you have something that you needed to say? I think there are some questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to see if I can pull that up and have a quick look. Okay, we have an anonymous. Oh, Eric is going to look at those for me. Thank you, Eric.
You're doing a good job. Unfortunately, did Linda ever fix her audio issues?
I think so. Actually, my husband fixed them.
Oh, okay. I see two of you now. Perfect. Glad you're working. Unfortunately, we couldn't get Joan to work. We've been trying behind the scenes, but just wouldn't work. So these questions are for all of you, but actually some of us backstage came up with a few too. We couldn't help them. But you had a really good question from an anonymous person. Have you ever thought about killing off one of the people in a romantic relationship? And I think what they mean by that is, have you ever thought about killing off the protagonist's love interest?
Huh?
Have you ever thought about killing off the protagonist's love interest?
Oh, yeah. Like you mean in a book, like
Book, short story,
Yes,
yeah.
looking in a book.
not for real.
That just happened in Oregon.
Yeah, that's true.
I think the lesson there is don't admit to your crimes in your fiction.
Exactly.
Anyone else? I hope.
Well, I was just gonna
Even
say-
Donna. Yes,
Sorry.
Amy?
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think doing that is actually a very rich ground for story right there, right? Because you can do so much once the love interest is gone, and you know, in terms of repercussions for your protagonist, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, definitely kill off those love interests for sure.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm gonna just say, I want to just take a second before we go to the next question and just plug Joan Donaldson-Yarmy. Her book, you can see it over my shoulder here, called A Killer Match, is also available, and you can please look it up, because due to technical difficulties, we couldn't get Joan on to speak for herself. So I just wanted to say that. But I'm hoping Hope's got an answer to that great question about killing off the love interest, killing off your darlings.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it would definitely be something to consider if it is part of the story. I mean, if it is something that makes logical sense in the story, if the person is driven to that, but there has to be a very strong reason. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the story that I mentioned earlier, it's called Beloved Ink, and it's coming out in the Spirit of 13 in the fall by the Mesdames of Mayhem. There is that, you know, watch for that when you do get the book in the fall. There's definitely a very strong love element, and there is also a very strong death. There's the eros and the ethos, I guess you would say, you know. So
I don't know. I think it's sort of, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, keep going, Linda.
Well, I think it's sort of dangerous in a way. Like I remember, oh God, can't remember the name of the book, but basically one of my kids was reading George R.R., whatever his name is.
Game of Thrones, Martin.
Yeah, right. And like she was like obsessed with a certain character, and then he killed the character off, and she put the book down and she did not go back to it for quite a while. And I mean, you risk really losing people. I think that's the only caveat.
Unless that's the point of the story. I mean, as Hope said, if that is the organic movement of the story, then you really have no choice, unless you want to write alternate endings for your readers, and people have done that, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, well, he's kind of he does like to kill characters off,
Oh, he
that's for
does.
sure.
He does.
But I don't know, yeah, maybe I'm a bit too much of a softie for that.
Well, the next question comes from Vanessa Weston. How do you balance the threat of danger with the promise of romance in your stories? And do you plan out an emotional character arc for your protagonists that they'll go through beforehand? Or do you allow their growth to surprise you? Lots of nodding. Hope I'm
Yeah.
start.
Sure. Yeah, the idea of the balancing danger with the promise of romance. I like the way that's phrased, and it feels like those two things can work together as you move towards a climax of the story, that the people that are involved together may be solving the crime or join quite closely in the story towards the end. And so that there would be, that would be one way I could envision it being balanced. But yeah, it would be different in all, just depending on the story, how heavily it's weighted towards the romance or to the mystery side, I think. So it's be story specific. In terms of the emotional arc of the characters, I do try to work that out at the beginning, but then during the writing, things can go in different directions and it can become more organic, would be my answer.
Amy?
Well, I wish I could do any planning or outlining or thinking before I start to write, but I really, the actual fingers on the keyboards is generative for me. So I don't, I write a terrible first draft and then see what I've got. So I'm not planning out any arcs beforehand. I'm not even really understanding how my murder is going to happen until I get to the end, and then I try to fix it up. But definitely in those revisions, that's when I'm then looking for to tease out those arcs. And just like Hope said, you want everything in the story. You want this sort of danger and excitement and satisfaction of solving the puzzle and moving that forward to align with the love story or the romance and all your character development as well. So it all has to hopefully work in tandem with each other.
Yeah, has to be sincere.
Yeah.
Yes, I've done it all of the ways that you can imagine. I've had the organic, I've always been fascinated with painters, and my husband and I have been very interested in the Canadian artists for many years. And whenever I feel like I have a tad of writer's block coming on, we'll go look at some of the paintings, and it always kind of gets me going again. And the reason I mention that is because I had one novella that was, it was like a painting in my head. I knew everything about it from start to finish before I started to write. And so I was writing almost like an automaton, where it was just my fingers were just telling the story that was already there and putting it on the page. And I imagine that that's how painters bring to life their canvases, at least some of them. Another one I wrote was extremely well mapped out because it had multiple storylines. And so I actually did the storyboard thing where I had sticky notes on a storyboard and moved them around when the timeline didn't seem to work and things like that. And another one was in the first person singular, and I just followed her. So, you know, there's so many ways to do it. Linda, how much of your arc is actually in play before you? And let's ask that about your police procedural in particular.
The police procedural, the story was the story from the beginning, and also the character development and the arc of the relationship, which in this case the protagonist and his, you know, love of his life from college get back together, but they're off and on, you know, they're not very successful sometimes as grown-ups in terms of their relationship. It's a lot easier to be romantic, I think, like really romantic when you're younger, and at least that's the way I see it. It seems to me that they get a little bit kind of stuck sometimes, but it's all going to work out in the end.
My
Donna, I
husband
don't know
will
if you were
be-
checking the chats at all, but there was a lot of comments that you're a great moderator. I'm
Oh,
agreeing.
thank you.
I'm
Thank you,
agreeing with
everyone.
that
I
too.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's just so much fun to talk about our favorite subject. We all love to talk about books and writing and every aspect of it. And as I said earlier, I mean, love is the first story. So,
Absolutely.
and there's so many kinds of love too. Like, it's not just always the romantic love. We love our children. We love our parents. We love our families. We love our friends.
Mhm.
And all of these things. I always think about, correct me if I get this wrong, but Sidney Carter. And it's a far, far greater thing I do. I mean, his love was so great that it could not even be stated or expressed earlier in the book. It was only at the end that, it could be expressed. There's so many kinds of love, and they color all of our work, even the really gritty stuff, as I discovered recently.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This question is from Wendy Tippin, who's quick shout out to Wendy. I think she's been to every show or almost all of them. So thank you very much, Wendy. And she asks a lot of questions. So it's directed to Amy, but it could be slightly altered for all of you. Amy, will your coworkers be scanning your book to see themselves as characters?
This is a concern. But luckily I did write this book. Well, I wrote it in 2008. So it's sort of been sitting for a long time, and it's now finally coming out. So I worked hard in 2008 to make sure that I wasn't including any coworkers or any sort of workplace drama. And so I feel like if some things slipped in back then, hopefully the passage of time has kind of dulled the
Wait to sleep.
I'm hopeful, but I certainly, yes, that I had to sort of sometimes change people's hair colors, or sometimes when I, in a revision, I was like, oh, that name actually is very close to someone else's name, even if the person wasn't even if I hadn't based a character on a particular colleague. When I realized they had a similar name, I had to then, do a find all and replace all, because I am concerned. I did not include any of my lovely colleagues in the book. None of the staff at the National Archives of Canada are murderers, as far as I know. But it has been like, I appreciate that question, because I have been worried about it. And when I wrote it and then was like, okay, and it sat for a long time, I thought, oh, well, I don't have to worry about it. And then it sort of, when you're publishing, it becomes even more real to make sure that you are not accidentally depicting a colleague. So we'll see. I think I've managed it. Thank you for that question.
So Linda, similar, I mean, you've mentioned how some of your true life stories have influenced, your actual events in your life have affected your stories, but have you ever actually pulled people out of real life, made them into fictional characters?
I think the genesis sometimes can be with a person. You might have a character that, like somebody and you think that person is, like a great character and it would make a great character. You put that character into a book or a story, and that person changes so much, it's not the person at all. That's what I find anyway. So you do, like, sometimes you think, well, this is a perfect idea of, say, the boss that nobody likes or whatever. And that person never stays the same, at least in my experience. They're completely different. Or you think of like somebody that has been in a terrible situation, and you think that's a genesis of the crime. And maybe that person isn't a sympathetic character. But in fact, by the time that person is in your book, that person is a super sympathetic character. I don't know. That's how it goes.
Yeah, Hope, Rose, I guess, worded it a different question. So I'll similar, how do you go about creating your characters? Do you use any real life people or examples for your characters?
Yeah, sometimes I have people in my head who I think people that I know, who I think aspects of them, their personalities would make an interesting character. But I think it was Alfred Hitchcock who said that real people are too complex to be characters, that you really need, like when you're building a character, they're simpler than real people. Like with things that they want, desire, need, vulnerabilities, etc., but simpler. Real people too complex. And so I think I might take aspects of someone and put them into a character, but like actually taking a fully fledged person from real life, I don't think it would work.
Well, it's not right
Or
to do
would be-
it either. It really isn't. That's why we
No.
always start every piece of fiction with the disclaimer that this is a work of fiction. And
Yes.
it's just not right. It's not right. We're not out to shame people or to glorify people. We're out to write a good, entertaining story. And there are
Right.
going to be aspects of people we know. There have to be, because we're human,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
they're not usually totally intentional. And they're usually
Mhm.
just little composite pieces of something that we found interesting.
Mhm.
It's true, but at the same time, we're mystery writers. So if somebody ticks you off, if you ever be tempted to be
I can't tell you, back in the old Southern days, how many people asked me if I was planning to put a redheaded victim in one of my books, and they always said it lovingly because our big boss had red hair, and you know. And I never did. I never killed him off in a book. I actually always liked him. I thought he was a great person. So,
or even borrowed a name from somebody.
but everybody always wanted me to kill him off for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, we can kill him off. Yes, we can kill him off, or we can make him our villains.
Mhm.
So has anybody ever irked any of you enough to make them a villain? Or at least inspire a villain?
Yeah.
I've included annoying traits in,
Mhm.
and sort of had them be less sympathetic people in stories, for sure.
Hope, I have a very specific question from you from somebody in the back stage who obviously has a connection with you. Alice wanted to ask, can you tell us about your experience at Buddies and Bad Times? She says Guy Gilbert was a university professor.
My experience there was a great experience, writing plays and having some short plays produced over the years there. Yeah, it was a great experience, great like breeding ground of art, creativity, giving everyone a chance to explore their creative theatrical side, much like the character in my story. She would have loved Buddies.
It's a typical conference. We're getting like a lot of questions at the last minute, but unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to ask you these questions. I would like to leave it to Donna if you have any final remarks at all.
Oh, I just want to thank these great panelists, and I want to put a shout out to Joan as well. Thank you, Hope, and thank you, Amy, and thank you, Linda. You've given everyone an awful lot of yourself and your work in this panel, and I really appreciate it, because we're looking to always promote and have our people get more widely known. And it's hard out there. It's hard to do it, but I think by supporting each other in this way and having these kinds of talks, I do think it helps. So, and I want to thank everyone who came and attended. And I really want to thank Eric for jumping in with the questions, because I was kind of fumbling and fiddling there. Thank you, Eric. And I want to take a second to thank Mike Martin and his whole team as well.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
There
Yeah,
have been
there's a
some
lot of
great panels.
there's a lot of people
And
working in the
thank-
background. Sorry,
Yes.
Hope. Go.
Thank you, Donna. Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much,
you, Donna.
Donna.
Yeah, so once again, thank you to everyone watching.